Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes to join. So we'll kick off in about 60 seconds to a minute and a half. But welcome and thank you for joining us. This is our workshop on the housing infill and public-private lands funding application. This is one of our programs that we've released recently in our Regional Early Action Planning Grants 2.0 funding streams. So thank you again. Perhaps as we're waiting, we can go through some of the general rules, and I'll look to my colleagues, Jessica Reyes-Juarez and Zach Gardea, to let us know how folks can ask questions. I know that we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end, but I think that there's an opportunity to ask questions along the way.
Yeah, if folks want to include their questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, that would be welcomed, and we'll work to address those at the end of the presentation, or if we can throughout, if it's quick. I'm not sure if the chat is enabled for everyone to see or not. It is. So you could also throw questions or comments in there. That's also fine. We'll be on the lookout. Right.
But we would really like folks, it sounds like we'd really like folks to try to use the Q&A mainly. And so on that lower bar, Jessica, that's the Q&A. It's just to the right-hand side of the center there.
Right.
Great. All right. Well, without further ado, let's kick off. I know some folks are still joining us, so welcome for all those that have entered. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then pass it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we'll move into the application workshop. My name is Jacob Noonan. I'm a planning supervisor here with the Southern California Association of Governments, and I'm overseeing the business unit that's managing the rollout of this program, the housing infill on public and private lands, and a couple of other programs target in our PATH overall program, which is part of our Regional Early Action Planning Grants 2.0 funding streams. These programs are all focused on standing up and getting housing built and supporting cities, counties, organizations, and making those transformative changes to do just that. So without going any farther into the material, since we'll be covering that in the workshop, I'll pass it over to Jessica Reyes-Juarez to introduce herself. Take it away, Jessica.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jessica Reyes-Juarez. I'm an associate regional planner here at SCAG. I work with Jacob and Zach on our housing team, working on facilitating these new grant programs coming out of REAP 2.0. So happy to be here and chat with you and give you all the information you need for a great application. And I'll hand it to Zach, who's going to be here in the background, but still will be in and out and participating.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. Zach Gardea, Associate Regional Planner, part of this team rolling out the HIPP program. Thank you for joining us this morning. With that, I will turn it back over to Jacob.
Great. Thank you, Zach. So again, feel free to ask questions along the way. I think as just in terms of flow, we're recording this and we'll have this available on our website. So we will be moving through the presentation without stopping for questions along the way, but please, we do have an opportunity at the end following some announcements on our REAP 2 program to answer your questions, and we'll certainly be, if you have questions along the way, please add those to the Q&A if you like, or save them for us at the end, and we will address anything that we receive and then have time to take additional questions. So let's kick it off with the next slide. And let's see if we have, great, thank you so much. So a little overview of what we'll be covering. We will provide, Jessica will provide you with a program overview, the program timeline, information on, and resources or links to resources on how to apply. And then I will be picking it up for the application review. We'll run through the evaluation criteria and the questions, and then again we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. I believe that follows our general REAP 2.0 announcements. So that all being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Reyes-Juarez, who's going to kick us off with the program overview. Take it away, Jessica.
Great, thank you. So before we jump into the components of the application, we want to give you an overview of the HIPP pilot program and how it fits into the larger REAP program that SCAG is rolling out. So HIPP is funded under REAP 2.0. And for those unfamiliar with REAP, it's the Regional Early Action Planning Grant. It's a state-funded program, and it helps regions and jurisdictions with transformative planning and implementation to meet our housing needs and to spur housing production. So SCAG's REAP 2.0 program is positioned to receive $246 million. And it'll fund various grant programs that already rolled out or starting to roll out, and those are listed on the right. So HIPP is one component of this. So that's the primary focus of our presentation today. And again, the primary purpose of REAP 2.0 is to implement housing element programs, housing strategies that accelerate infill development, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and affirmatively further fair housing. So within the programs to accelerate transformative housing path, this is where the HIPP grant program lives. There are three other funding areas in path, but for reference, we're not going to really go into them, but just so you know that they exist. So for reference, the NOFA for lasting affordability, this one's geared towards housing finance and loan products for trust funds and catalyst funds. The regional utilities to support housing RUSH pilot program looks to fund innovative projects around housing supportive utilities, to fund system-wide and to fund system-wide sustainable utility infrastructure. So the housing infill on public and private land HIPP pilot program will make a little bit more than 8.8 million available in two key buckets, which is scaling up housing in surplus or underutilized land and increasing housing capacity along corridors and area-wide infill locations. So HIPP will provide technical assistance to public and private landowners who wish to explore developing their available lands with an affordable housing component, and provide technical assistance to cities and counties interested in increasing housing capacity along corridors and area-wide locations. So we'll get more into the eligible applicants later on in the presentation, but generally speaking, it's entities with land control or regulatory land control that are eligible to apply. And jumping into the program timeline, so this is what we'd like you to keep in mind. We released the call on May 10th, 2 weeks ago. The application period will stay open through July 10th. It closes at 5 p.m. Throughout this duration, you're free to, schedule some time with us. We have open office hours that you can reserve, and we'll go through how to schedule those. And we plan to issue conditional award letters within 60 days of that response due date. So this lands around early fall. And then from there, we'll move forward on working on those MOUs. And our target is to have these funds encumbered by January 2024. And that's when we can begin procurement. So you'll have until December 2025 to fully complete the project. So we want you to consider this timeline when you're building out your proposal timeline to ensure that the project can be delivered in time. So we'll go over that. There's an attachment for that. So we'll go over that later on in the presentation as well. And moving on to how to access the application. If you haven't already accessed it, it's available on our REAP 2021 webpage. And so that's scag.gov/REAP 2021. And the application, it's a form fillable Word doc. And it'll include a few attachments that we'll go over, and you'll be submitting the application via email to housing@scag.ca.gov with HIPP application in the subject line. And that needs to be submitted by the due date and time. So sometimes websites can be a little confusing, right? So let's just go over it very quickly on how you can grab that application and download it from our website. So you go to scag.ca.gov/REAP 2021. And then you scroll down. Sorry, there's a delay here, so I need to talk before hitting next. Okay, I don't know if we're getting the slides, but you scroll down to programs to accelerate transformative housing. That's the PATH program bucket. And then from there, you'll select the housing infill on public and private lands. And that's where all of this information is going to live, where you'll be able to schedule office hours. That'll direct you to a Calendly link. And then it also has the instructions on how to apply there. You download the application here and the attachments. And then as well, there's some links to some resources that we'll be referring to. So this is important to note as well. So now let's start digging into the contents of the HIPP application. We're going to start with the submittal checklist, which begins on page 7, and then we'll work our way through the end here. So the checklist highlights 4 sections of the application, which we'll go over individually, and the required attachments. Sorry, jumping ahead. The checklist is intended to help keep you on track for the various attachments and make sure that every section is completed, because to be considered a complete response to the call, you have to submit you have to fully complete the application and submit all of the attachments. So you'll note that we do reference a template that would be coming, and that's called the measurable outcomes. We reference this in the application on the website as a required attachment. We don't have this template ready yet. It's likely it may not need to be submitted with this application, but you need to be aware that there is a commitment to reporting on measurable outcomes once the project's awarded. So it's under discussion right now with the state on how to finalize that. So we'll provide more information on that later. So moving on to section 1, that's the signature and terms. A person that is duly authorized to sign for the organization, such as a city manager, general manager, executive director, or planning director, must sign and certify the application. By signing, this confirms that all the information provided is true and correct, and that you as the applicant will adhere to the PATH program guidelines, and that the applicant will provide a local resolution by the city or entity's governing body authorizing the execution of that funding agreement and receive the funds. So you don't need to have that prepared as part of the application, but once the funds are awarded, you will need that local resolution. Moving on to section 2, here are the minimum requirements to apply. So first is the applicant eligibility. So to be able to apply for HIPP, you must confirm that you're an entity with land, control of the land. It's either public or private, or you must have regulatory control of the land, such as a tribal entity, city, county, or district. So some example of these are included on the right: city, county, or tribal entity, a public agency, transit agency, or district, a public housing authority, a land trust, or a land holder, or a regulator, academic institutions, or other specialty districts like water or utility. To also be eligible to apply, you must meet the state definition, the REAP 2.0 infill definition. So again, this is coming from the state, and there's a guidance document under a resources tab that I shared with you. It's called the Infill guidance document, and it outlines the definition, and it also includes a glossary that provides a description of what some of these terms mean. So we'll have you refer to that document, but in short, to be eligible, you must meet Part A here that you see, Part B, and either Part C1 or C2. And again, we'd ask you to self-select and self-verify and make sure that your project is meeting the infill definition. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to set up some office hours. And moving on to section 3, which is the project description. So section 3 is fairly straightforward, and it's where you'll start filling out your contact information and project description. Under section 3.1 is where you're filling your organization's contacts. And if you're an entity that's submitting multiple applications under HIPP, we ask that you list them out by priority. So there's an opportunity to list them out by the other proposal names there. And section 3.2, project name and location. We ask that you provide parcel APNs or a description of the project boundary so we can clearly denote where the location is. And under section 3.3 is where you'll provide an overview of the project and align that to what you'll be describing in the budget timeline, scope, and deliverables attachment, which we'll go over that. But this only needs to be a couple paragraphs, no more than 250 words. It's just to summarize your project. And then we'll also ask you to identify any priority growth areas in your project area. So to do this, you'll need to submit a map, which you'll use using our REAP 2.0 mapping tool. We'll also go over this and once we review the attachments. But before we get into that, I'm going to hand it over to Jacob so he can cover the following section, which is the scoring and the evaluation questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I'm going to pause for just a moment on this next slide because it looks like some folks are not seeing the slides change. And our AV support has suggested that if that's happening, if you're not seeing the slides change, to try to rejoin if it's frozen. Okay, so I'll go a little slow on this slide just to give folks a chance to give that a shot, see if they can rejoin and if it works out better for them. In our evaluation criteria for the PATH program, we identified 5 topic areas, and these include leading to transformative, significant, beneficial impact, which is really based on the REAP 2.0 program goals, meeting the state's planning priorities, including equitable targeted outreach, leveraging partnerships, policy match, building local capacity and the ability to complete the project and cost effectiveness, prioritizing disadvantaged communities, and then contributing to regional transformative change. So in these next slides, I will go through each one of these individually along with the questions. I'm not seeing, just checking the chat quickly, not seeing any other concerns over the slides right now, but definitely let us know if you're not seeing these slides change. We want to make sure that the information is getting out there to people on this workshop. So moving on, with this with the 5 criteria, we are going to score these using a 5-point scale that you see here. It's in a summary form, but in the application, you'll see that we've developed out what a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1 entail, clearer for each of the questions in the criteria. It's important to note that you do need to score, your application does need to score a 1 in order to be considered. So a score of less than 1 will be disqualified. Now, again, the 5 criteria here are generally laid out with the bullet points on the left, and all projects, all actions, let's say all projects in the application need to meet all 5 of the criteria. So it is meeting all 3 of the program objectives, meeting this definition of transformational planning and implementation activity and significant beneficial impact. Both of those are defined in the application and in our guidelines, providing the equitable targeted outreach and aligning and supporting the Connect SoCal plan. So a little deeper into criterion 1, which leading to transformative significant beneficial impact. This is worth 45% of the total score. 15% are allocated equally to each of the areas. And you may recognize these 3. These are the 3 program objectives in REAP 2.0. I won't restate them. We've said them a few times, but I do want to relay that your projects do need to address all 3. And that a score of less than 1 in any one of these would disqualify the project. And we do have office hours. We're happy to meet with you and discuss your projects and be your thought partner on how you would address these if you do have any challenges or concerns over how your project may, for instance, reduce vehicle miles traveled if you're centering that project on accelerating infill development for housing supply, as an example. So the questions dig in directly to this. There's 3 questions within the criteria. The center, the first one focused on infill, on accelerating housing supply, choice, and affordability within infill areas. You do also need to align this very strongly with the definition of infill that is provided in the application and in the guidelines. Within the criteria around affirmatively furthering fair housing, you will need to look at how your program will approach and address overcoming patterns of segregation and combating discrimination and fostering equitable, inclusive communities. And then, of course, under reducing vehicle miles traveled, we are looking for your approach to how your project will ultimately promote development that does reduce vehicle miles traveled by making it possible for people to accomplish all of their daily needs outside of a vehicle, and then aligning with our sustainable community strategy and California AB 32. Now, this last bullet point also connects into our 5th criterion, so we'll discuss a little bit further on. So criterion 2, section 4.2 in the application focuses in on targeted equitable outreach. There's 2 questions here, both worth 5% for a total of 10%. And this really centers on the commitment to continuing the outreach and engagement to disadvantaged and historically underserved communities. This is engagement that cities and counties have begun and have been doing as part of the 6th cycle housing element update. The first question around experience is to talk about your organization's experience in engaging residents in disadvantaged and historically underserved areas. If your organization has limited experience, you may also discuss how you envision gaining that experience, or how you would provide this, through consultants or other actions to ensure that you would be providing that targeted equitable outreach. And then the second question is the equitable engagement itself, and how you would approach this, the community organizations, the community leaders that you would partner with to accomplish this outreach, and then discussing how members of disadvantaged, historically underserved communities will be a part of the decisioning process in the project. So section 4.3, this is a section centered on leveraging partnerships, policy match, and building local capacity, as well as cost effectiveness and ability to complete the project. In this category is worth 25%, 5% for policy commitment, and I'll cover what that means, 5% for partnerships and financial match, then 15% for the ability to complete the project and cost effectiveness. So the questions centering in the first question, centering on commitments. We're asking you to discuss your existing or prior policy commitment. So these are prior actions that your governing body, your city council or board of supervisors, or your if you're an organization outside of the public realm, in the private realm, your organization, and the commitment that you've had to taking actions towards affordable housing and to increasing supply. It's could include your plans, your policies, ordinances, any actions really that support that your readiness to take this step towards increasing housing supply, scaling it either on available lands or taking those actions to shift your policy environment, your regulatory policy environment around land use in infill areas. Partnerships, we're looking for you to describe any forms of partnerships that you have now with philanthropy, with other outside organizations, community-based organizations, for instance, and opportunities to leverage these funds through other actions and commitments from others. The final question, centering in completing the ability to complete the project, really asks us to tell us the feasibility and the reality of completing this work that you've envisioned. How will this happen? How will you keep the work on time and on target and on budget? And then what is the cost-effective measures that you're considering for the project? How will you be sure that these funds will be used in a cost-effective manner? So section 4.4, our fourth criterion of focusing priority on disadvantaged communities, this really centers on the idea that we've had disadvantaged and historically underserved communities throughout the SCAG region, and asking you to describe in your project how you will approach and support community members in these areas. It's worth 10 points, 10% total, 5% per each question. The first question centers around, asks you to identify priority populations in and around your area. So we should note that you don't need to have priority populations in your community or within the project area. However, we're asking you to identify priority populations that you would be targeting for to design these programs for support to. So that first question, it relates to our mapping tool, to mapping, and Jessica will cover that after we get through the attachments, but also to the mapping tool, and then to discuss and describe how your project will address folks in disadvantaged communities. Secondly, the second question is asking you to dig deeper into the benefits and how your proposed project will really support and benefit folks living in these priority population communities. And lastly, our fifth criterion, which looks at how your project will contribute to regional transformative change, centers in the questions around how the project can be replicated across the region and other similar geographies, and how it is transformable in scaling up housing development, in connection and meeting our regional goals around the regional housing needs assessment, our Connect SoCal plan, and the sustainable community strategy. So this area also, we do ask that you develop some priority growth area maps that will be used to influence and add further to your discussion topics in these two questions. Again, both worth 10% of the total score. So the first question centering around scaling housing supply and asking you to discuss your project and your approach in its transformative nature in your local and regional context for housing. That's advancing and expanding the conditions necessary to scale housing supply choice and affordability, for instance. The second question centers on regional impact and how you believe this project and this approach will have a lasting impact, a change on at the geographic scale, in your local geography and regionally, and then ask you to connect, make some connections to your work that you'll complete to our SCS, or our Sustainable Community Strategy, in terms of housing supply and meeting our housing needs, but then also in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing vehicle miles traveled, and aligning with also in this question, I think that we're asking about the state planning priorities and how this project would really help achieve regional success in our housing plans. So I believe at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica Reyes-Juarez. She'll lead us through our attachments. And before we start there, I just want to quickly check the chat and see. It looks like we haven't had any other comments from folks that haven't seen the slides. So hopefully folks have been able to rejoin and that the slides are changing for you. So, but let us know if that's not the case. Take it away, Jessica.
Thank you. So we've made it towards the end of the presentation / application, which is to go over these attachments. So we'll quickly go over them. And the attachments you'll be submitting as part of your application are these 3 chunks here. So the first is the budget, timeline, scope, and deliverable. There is an Excel workbook template for this that you could find where you download the application. This is a separate download. And then there's a series of maps that you'll need to submit, and we'll go over instructions on how to do that. And then a letter of support. So this letter of support will need to come from a third-party organization that the project meets local housing needs. So if you need any guidance where to start with this, we did include a letter of support guidance document under the resources tab that another SCAG program developed. It's very focused for that other program. So I would just note that for HIPP, you only need to submit 1 letter of support, but you're welcome to submit multiple. So for the first attachment, let's try again. Budget, scope, deliverables, and timeline. Again, this is an Excel template, and please be sure to complete both tabs and submit this with your application as an Excel file. The first tab is where you're outlining your budget. And if you have funds coming from another source, you'll also make a note of that here and what are the total fund requests that you're requesting from REAP. And you'll also estimate a schedule by shading the duration of each task so that you can denote that the project will be completed within that grant application period. So again, for projects coming under HIPP, we ask that the projects be fully completed by December 31st, 2025. And then there's also a second tab that you'll need to complete, which is the scope and deliverables tab. And this is where you'll outline the scope, approach, and deliverables for each task. Don't skimp on this because this is going to be used for the MOU base and the project procurement. So this is going to help really accelerate us to get those MOUs out, to get procurement out if we have a really good scope, deliverables, and approach outlined in advance. So the next series of attachments you'll be asked to submit is the project area maps. Sorry, having a hard time proceeding here. Okay, here we go, project area maps. And there are three mapping requests that we have. So the first is the Infill map. And this is where you will visually denote the project area boundary. And you'll describe how the project meets the definition of infill. So in this map, if you have like a parcel or multiple parcels, or it's a corridor, an area, please visually denote that on the map. And we also provided an infill guidance document, and that will give you some tips and tricks on how to do this using Google Maps. And it'll also give you instructions on how to interpret some of these terms. There's, like I mentioned before, there's a glossary there that can help you understand more of like, well, what do you mean by destinations or daily transit services? So depending on the geography of your project, you may be able to visually denote all of these elements here on the map. Though if that's a challenge, you're welcome to submit a supporting narrative to denote how you're achieving these elements in your project. So again, the entire project must meet the infill definition. And if you have any questions or concerns on that, again, please feel free to set up some office hours with us. The next series of maps you'll be asked to submit is to identify the priority populations. And this map is going to be used using the REAP 2.0 indicator mapping tool. And this tool can be found under the resources tab. Along with this, under the resources tab, there's also some instructions and guidance on how to map these priority populations. So you'll want to take a screenshot of each layer. So each of these priority populations, and again, that's found in the application and then also in the instructions. So as a reminder, your projects don't need to have a priority population in order to be eligible to apply, but you do have to demonstrate how you're supporting them. So this could be, bringing affordability in a high resource area. So you'd want this map to kind of show that as well. And again, it's not required for eligibility, but there is a question that Jacob referred to. One of the questions is, what priority populations are you meeting? So if you're unable to answer that question, you won't receive any points for that. The final series of map is the priority growth areas. So we're asking that you identify any PGA layers that fall within your project area. And this includes the high quality transit areas, transit priority areas, job centers, neighborhood mobility areas, or livable corridors. So again, for each one, just turn the layer on and off, take a screenshot. So submit multiple maps here. And then you also don't need to be in a PGA layer to be eligible to apply, but this does help support how you are aligning to our regional goals and aligning to Connect SoCal. And then again, that, sorry, let me just go back to reiterate that this is also going to be used. You'll also be using the REAP 2.0 indicator mapping tool to create this map as well. So the tool is there. Hopefully it's easy and straightforward. And the guidance documents we provided you provide some clarification, but if you have any questions on that, again, we can set up some time with us. So this presentation and this recording will be posted on the HIPP landing page website. We'll likely post it under that resources tab. So if you need to refer back to it, it'll be there. And we also have office hours throughout the duration of the application. So again, you can also schedule this using that link there in the HIPP landing page. Or if you get lost, you just send us an email and we'll direct you to it. And with that, we wrapped up our review of the application, but I'm going to hand it over to Alicia James, who just has a few announcements before we jump into Q&A.
Thanks, Jessica. All righty, let's see here. So just wanted to share with you all first, let me introduce myself. My name is Alicia James. I'm a Senior Public Affairs Specialist at SCAG, supporting our REAP programs. And just wanted to share some exciting announcements with you all. We have a variety of calls for applications that are out, and wanted to make sure that you all have those dates. The Sustainable Communities Programs call for civic engagement, equity, and environmental justice that has $5 million available, and supports different project categories, including housing and land use strategies and multimodal communities. That application is open until June 5th. Our County Transportation Commission Partnership Program application period has already closed. Our Sub-Regional Partnership Program 2.0, which is a non-competitive program for our sub-regional partners, that closes on May 31st. We plan to announce our notice, our NOFA, for funding for lasting affordability under our PATH program pretty soon, hopefully in the next week or so. So be on the lookout for that. You can learn more information at our REAP 2.0 website. And then finally, our RUSH program, we just wrapped up our industry forum earlier this month. So be on the lookout for that call for application as well sometime during the summer. I do want to announce that all of these programs have their own guidelines as well as the state. So if you are interested, please review the guidelines. We have all of those resources and information on our website. And each of the programs are hosting office hours to support you in your application process. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Uh-oh, it jumped twice. I know, okay, now it's being weird. Let's see if that works. Okay, so I know that Jessica shared the REAP 2.0 indicator tool earlier, but did want to note that we have our regional data platform, which includes various tools, data tools, including our housing element parcel tool and our local data exchange tools. We also have a new tool that is provided by Streetlight. It's a big data platform that looks at travel behavior in real time. So if you are interested in that, please visit our regional data platform. All of these resources are there to support you and any of your REAP 2.0 applications. Let's see if that moves forward. And then finally, wanted to share with you all RENA reform. SCAG is currently undergoing the process as part of Assembly Bill 101. HCD is preparing a report on RENA reform and making recommendations to the state legislature by December 31st. And so SCAG staff did conduct a stakeholder engagement process last year, and we gathered input, we prepared recommendations. And so now we are sharing out those recommendations with you all and getting your feedback. So there are a couple opportunities for you to provide input. So one way to give input is our RENA reform survey that's open through June 30th of this month, or next month, sorry, and then a listening session on June 22nd. And we should be announcing a second date soon. And then also you can submit comments to housing@scag.ca.gov as well. And so the draft recommendations will be provided in this PowerPoint, but you can also find them at scag.ca.gov/RENA. And I think that concludes my announcements.
Well,
Thank you, Alicia.
so much.
We do have, oh, sorry, Jacob. I was just going to say, we have some questions coming in the Q&A. So thank you, Zach, for answering those on the fly, but maybe we want to go over some that have already been asked to maybe provide more information on that. So one question that we see here is that the HIPP pilot program, we know has around 8 million. What is the maximum amount that an applicant can request?
This is a great question. And I want to pull in also another question that's related to this around developing a consultant bench to assist the program. So a little information on the dynamics of how the funds will be issued and how the work will be completed. So we are working on developing a consultant bench, and awarded applications will be drawn off, the work will be drawn off of that bench. And so we will at SCAG do the procurements on behalf of the applicants. a scope of work will be submitted to our bench. The applicants, the cities, counties, organizations will be able to select their consultants, but the contracts between the consultant will be with SCAG, and then we'll manage the funds and the reimbursement of those funds. So these are all reimbursement grants. The monies have to be spent first, and then it's recovered from the state. So that is how the projects will be completed. So cities don't have to do or applicants don't have to do your own procurement. Those will be done through this bench. We haven't set a maximum amount on the award. We were curious and interested to see what the proposals would be that came in from applicants. And so you're welcome to propose any dollar amount, but just be aware that we may have to have a conversation around what could be funded versus the full project if we are oversubscribed, and we are expecting that we'll most likely be oversubscribed above the 8 million. With this also, I think dovetails us into another question that I saw in the chat, Jessica, and maybe you could take this one around our leverage and the idea of, are applicants able to come in with matching funds or with other funds that could support the project?
Right. So yes, like Zach answered there, it's one way that you can show that requirement to have leverage. You can show that you have funding already in place, but again, it's not required. If there's another way that you can show leverage through that partnership, you'll also receive points for that. There's
Great.
also a question about what work this is going towards. This is for pre-development projects, right? Like it's not for development or construction. So if you're looking at developing underutilized lands, which point of that process can these funds go towards?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So because we, in our REAP 2.0 programs, we're not able to fund projects directly. We cannot fund housing development directly. And when our Notice of Funds Available for Lasting Affordability program comes out, we'll go into more depth around that. We're able to stand up and support actions at the programmatic level. And what that means for the HIPP pilot program is that we can fund those actions that increase and create greater capacity for housing within areas and along corridors, meeting the infill definition. So, here's it's not the only concept here, but I think that an easy one to think about is those transit-oriented development areas, or areas around mobility hubs and other transportation-focused placemaking areas, that these funds can help support those efforts to increase the potential for housing through shifts in zoning control. Within those areas as well, major landowners, either the cities, counties, agencies, or private organizations, can apply for consultants to inventory, assess, identify, and do pre-development work on those lands to make those lands more readily available and essentially develop a pipeline, if you will, gearing them towards development. So we can fund all of the background studies and analysis on lands to make them more ready to be issued through an RFP, if you will, and to get a developer or a sponsor on board that could then take that project forward.
We also have a question that came in through the chat. This is a great question here. So there are hundreds of state-owned parcels that meet priority growth areas in places like LA. If the state owning doesn't have the capacity to apply, but supports exploring housing, how can outside nonprofit housing organizations apply for funding on their behalf? Yeah. So this is, that seems like a great project, an applicable project, but there is a requirement here that to be eligible to apply, you have to have regulatory land control or land control. So unfortunately, a nonprofit doesn't have that. So you would need to have the state apply on your behalf. Because there is a strong component to the REAP dollars that is geared towards implementation. So there needs to be some authority at the end of this that's going to take action on the outcomes of this project, on the outcomes of site analysis. So if that component is missing, it wouldn't qualify for this funding, but there would need to be, the state in this situation applying.
That's a very important question. I appreciate the person who asked that. To add on to Jessica's statements, in the REAP 2.0 guidelines itself, there's also a requirement, for lands that we're moving into development, that it's foreseeable that the lands could be developed within a time horizon after the expenditure date, which is June 30th of 2026. And so, the state gives an example of 5 years. And so with these funds, certainly planning and pre-development activities are possible, but the state is asking us to also see that there's a through line to achieving a tangible product, either changes in zoning that increase the potential for housing in infill areas, or that lands are eventually moved into development, and that there's those are counted as developed projects down the road. Now, I should mention that when we're looking at development of land, it doesn't have to be just only reserved for affordable housing. You could look at mixed use projects. These are identified in the guidelines as having 65% of the floor area being housing, but that you can have other uses. So this is an opportunity for placemaking, for developing mixed use developments. And then we're indicating a component of affordability, recognizing that you could also, within these development areas, explore other ranges of housing price, not just affordable housing. And then there's a comment around the struggles or the challenges for housing, for lands development, and that it could be a chicken and the egg dilemma, where we need a landowner ready and willing, which requires planning and outreach and pre-development diligence to get them interested in seeing the path forward. That however, the government entities, especially many state departments, do not have the capacity to get them ready. So this inaction gap will persist. And we are very interested in engaging and working with landowners now. And so very open. I'll put my my email contact in the chat. It's available on the website. I believe we may have it at the end of this presentation as well. I would love to just discuss with anyone, if you do have contacts or can provide a warm introduction to major landowners. We'd love to talk to them about this program. Well, so it looks like we have another question coming in the Q&A. I'll read this out for Jessica. Maybe you could take this one. Mm-hmm. May a local jurisdiction apply for a project that involves both publicly owned and privately owned land? And does the jurisdiction need to focus on one or the other?
Yeah, that does seem like a possible project. If there are privately owned land, like parcels that you are interested in, you should speak to those owners and see if you can get some type of support from them, and mention that type of partnership in the application. If you're looking, but if you're looking like in a corridor or an area-wide area, there's specific plans, or there's other types of corridor or area-wide plans, that's also eligible to apply, where you're kind of looking at a chunk, a grouping. The parcels don't have to be all next to each other. They can be kind of scattered. But yeah, anything to add to that, Jacob?
No, I think that you covered it well.
Yeah, there, and Valerie asked a question in the chat as well. Yes, these dollars are not for construction. So if you want a list of, there is a list of projects and plans that would be eligible. It's in the guidelines. It's also in the application. But I think we listed a few of them, but there could be, you know, site studies, feasibility, environmental. But again, we need to consider what that action is at the end, and what is that commitment to move forward. So there is a wide range of eligibility, but that is the consideration you need to make.
Yeah. Mainly, we were seeing this as an opportunity to identify available lands. So inventories, feasibility assessments, highest and best use assessments. You could do some environmental analysis, or most likely just preliminary work. All the projects do need to be completed by the end of December of 2025, and so there is a timeline consideration on what work can be done. Now, in terms of the units that are ultimately created down the road, the guidance that we have in the state, from the state in their guidelines, is that there's a foreseeable outcome, and they suggest a timeline of 5 years after that expenditure date. The final ultimate expenditure date of the funds is June 30th of 2026, and so you'd be looking at the idea that these lands could be developed before June 30th of 2031. So I'm curious, are we able to allow folks to come off mute and to ask questions directly, or are we only able to do the Q&A screen and the chat screen?
I think, yeah, we could do that if somebody wanted to
Great.
share verbally instead of through the chat.
Yeah, so as an option. Oh, great. And we have a volunteer right away. So
I'll volunteer to make my voice heard. Good morning, and thanks
hi,
for
good morning.
this really informative webinar. My name is Azine Khan Malik, and I work at Mayor Karen Bass's office at the City of Los Angeles. And I had a couple questions, mostly for clarity. The first is, I know early in the presentation you had said, you're looking for addresses and APNs, and I'm kind of curious as to how kind of specific and congealed like the target sites need to be in applying for the HIPP program. Is, I guess, my thought is that, like, well, part of the consultant support and the work that we would do is helping to really delineate and identify the best sites, so to speak, to move forward with on development. So is it a situation in which we can say, well, hey, here are 10 sites, or 10 priority sites that we're looking at, and through XYZ in our scope, we're going to identify 4 or 5 that we're definitely going to move forward with into development, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah, that so you're referring to the description for the project, and this is a project where you're looking to assess your available lands. We're looking for as much information as possible. Certainly the lands do need to be within infill development, but in this aspect of inventory, just depending on your organization's size and the amount of available lands that you may have, we would be open to your thoughts around how you describe and define that project. Certainly, for the City of LA and its several agencies, you would have a very different scenario around what possible lands you may have available for development versus a smaller scale organization or other agency. So hopefully that helps with your question, Azine. Yeah.
It does. Thank you. And then, sorry, just one additional kind of point of clarity. I'm just curious about the kind of third-party letter of support. As a, you know, I tried looking on the website and I couldn't find much about kind of any more details about that letter of support. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on who that might come from. Are we talking about a nonprofit housing advocacy organization? Or are we talking about another regional public agency? Just kind of curious to get your thoughts there.
It could be either. You know, we haven't provided a template. We're looking for a letter of support from someone who would be a possible partner. You know, so this could be a community-based organization. It could also be an agency such as a housing authority or a housing department, for instance, someone who you see and envision being one of your key partners or a partner in realizing the project.
Great. Thank you so much.
You bet. You bet. And hopefully that was helpful for others as well. So that's great. Thank you, Azine, for jumping on audio and asking your questions. So we do have that is an opportunity for folks. Feel free to raise your hand and we can take your questions in real time. We can also continue to respond to questions in the chat. Again, we are recording and we will make this available on the website following today's workshop. We do have office hours open and available, and we are excited to meet with you and hear your ideas for the possible projects that you'd be looking at applying. We will be summarizing all of the questions and answers from today's workshop and making those available as a document on our website. And then we'll do that about halfway through the call with all questions that we receive in our office hours to make sure that folks have information and responses for all of the general questions that are coming up around the application.
I don't see any more questions coming through. We'll give folks last chance.
Yeah, I really do appreciate it. I think we all appreciate everyone joining us this morning, and we're very thrilled in the interest that's been shown around this program. We think that this is going to be a very dynamic and program that has a lot of potential to transform our how we get housing built. So we are really looking forward to seeing your proposals. Again, please visit our website if you haven't already. Sign up for office hours. We are looking forward to continuing the conversations, and thank you all for your great questions today in the meeting. So I think maybe we'll just pause and see if there's any other questions right now. And if not, seeing none. Again, I really appreciate you all for joining us, and thank you, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Great, thank you all.
Have a good day.